Hello and welcome to the show. Now, when it comes to race cars, whatever it might be, in fact, that you are racing from remote control cars all the way up to Formula 1 cars, tyres are very, very important. And in the new Forza Motorsport game, things are different than they have been in the past. Tyres have a whole sort of different physics model, and we finally have different compounds of tyres. When you get to the slick tyres, you can have, you've got soft, medium and hard tyres along with wet weather tyres as well. This, something that we've all wanted in Forza for, quite a while, is fantastic to see. And naturally, I was curious to see how all of this would stack up, how the different compounds would work and everything. So I set off to do a bit of an investigation. First of all, we'll go and take an Audi R8. So, full-on race car here. This is a GT3 car, I think it is. And run it around the Lime Rock circuit. Now, I appreciate this might not be the sort of normal test venue of sorts, but I wanted to try and pick a track that I know quite well, that I could be fairly consistent on, or as consistent as possible, while still being relatively new to the game. So I take the car with all the different compound of tyres and see how things would stack up. Start off driving the car on hard tyres. The first thing I noticed, the R8 itself does certainly tend to oversteer, perhaps more than I would personally like from my cars. I like my cars to have a planted rear end, and this does not. As you can see here, with the hard tyres on the car, I was struggling a bit. I did get the hang of it, but it was certainly on the edge of sliding quite spectacular. But I did struggle with the oversteer with the car. And when you swap the car onto medium tyres, you could feel the difference. Now, it didn't solve all of the problems. It did still remain a bit oversteery, well, quite oversteery around the final curve. If you clobber the curb on the inside, you might get into trouble. Also, I don't know what the trees are doing. It only seems to do it in replay mode. Don't ask. Not sure. But as far as the tyres go, yes, you could feel a bit of a difference between these and the harder compound tyres. There was a little, but there was, as you would expect and as you would hope, there was that bit more grip, had a bit more confidence in the car. Still struggling a smidge with the oversteer, as we saw again. Even when later on in the run I sort of calmed the car down a bit, it was still an almost ever-present danger with running the Audi around here. And then the car was swapped on to the soft compound tyres. And again, the feel was, I say drastically better, it certainly felt considerably better. Jumping the car here, it's much easier to push. Now, it's difficult to tell actual lap speed from these replay cameras. The car just kind of looks fast, and unless it's drastically out of shape, you're not really going to be able to tell from sort of third-person camera exactly how, what sort of speed the car is going. But you can see it is certainly stuck to the road a lot better through here. It was easier to push the car. It was easier to push the car and push the car hard as well. The other big thing, of course, tyre temperature. That is it's a factor that you've got to bear in mind when it comes to Forza. The soft tyres are going to heat up quicker. So for the first couple of laps with the car on a hard tyre, you've got not very much grip going on. The soft tyres, they're going to heat up faster. You're going to get to the grip considerably quicker. And yeah, it did exactly what I would hope it would do, what you would want it to be doing. As you go through the different compounds of tyres, the car felt better and better. You get onto the soft tyre, the car feels very good stride. Possibly, the balance might just have suited me slightly more on the soft tyre. There's always an element of that. I mean, I try to be as consistent as possible, but there's always going to be natural preferences. It is possible, with the car now being a bit more planted, the balance suited me more and I was able to push it more, etc. But certainly, it was the nicest it had been running around on the soft tyres, as you would expect. You carry more corner speed, and I just had a whole load more confidence in the vehicle around the track. Now, interestingly, of course, you can put the car on the wet tyres. You can dump it on the wet tyres and then go and hot lap around a dry circuit. And I was curious how these would hold up. And, I mean, having gone from the nice soft-tyred Audi to going and sticking it on the wets, well, suddenly we go, I say we have no grip. It does have still, a pretty decent amount of grip. Probably more than you would expect to see from wet tyres on a completely dry track. You know, it's still going to go around the circuit, I say, relatively quickly. We go back to the same issues that we were having with the other tyres. The car becomes quite oversteery. It's a bit fiddly to drive. But yeah, just overall, it has an awful lot less grip. One other big thing I did notice with this one is the way the change in tyre physics. If you see there, for example, there, I just dipped the wheel on the grass in the braking zone. Now, that's quite prevalent at Lime Rock, where there's not a huge amount of curbing in places. It's very easy to do this slightly by accident. There's no sort of tarmac runoff area. If you tap the brakes there, and I got away with that. I very nearly didn't, and that was a tiny bit on the grass. If you put your wheel on the grass, even slightly, as you get on the brakes, you're going to be in massive, massive trouble. In fact, I did manage to go off at turn 1 at one point. I didn't have the replay saved. By doing that, just by a little bit too much on the grass, which was something interesting and something, again, different that I haven't really seen from previous Forza games as much, which was interesting and yeah, kind of good to see in terms of the way the tyres are reacting. But you can drive around with a wet tyre. It was you know, drivable and survivable. Now, of course, for this, I think, to be a complete test, it's not just going to be race cars that you are running on the slick tyres. You might be running normal cars. For this, I was using the Ford Falcon. The reason, I quite like the car. It's something a little bit different. It was also relatively high car level, so I could mess about with the build. This was about a mid B class. It wasn't fully maxed out, but it doesn't really matter because the actual lap time is irrelevant. The bit that matters is the differences between the different compound of tyres. And I was curious to see how the effects on this car would be in comparison to a full-on race car, because I mean this is a much bigger, much heavier vehicle, much less power. Much less power to be dealing with and much sort of lower power to weight ratio. There's no downforce, the minimal downforce. I'm gonna guess on this. I mean, it has got a wing. It's not like it's not a proper, you know, crazy aero producing wing and everything. So yeah, took the Falcon around, did the same thing, ran the vehicle on all 3 compounds of tyre to see how it would fare. Slightly less drastic feel difference when driving the Falcon, but in terms of lap time, actually was remarkably similar between the two vehicles. Now, of course, the R8 is going to be much, much faster, naturally. But between the wets and the hards, about half a second difference. The same could be said for the road car. The Ford was about that. It's a little bit smaller gap for that one. Between the hard tyres and the medium tyres, we're looking at about a second. Again, fairly consistent between both of them. The medium on the race car, again, more maybe like 0.6 of a second. But you know, you're talking around similar kind of margins, and then between the medium and the soft, you are looking at about a second. A lap difference there. And that was surprisingly consistent across both cars. Two vastly, vastly different cars, and it was basically consistent. Not necessarily the result that I was expecting in all this. I was kind of expecting the Falcons to be slightly less... I say like slightly less significant. I mean, it'd still be important, but it didn't feel like it was as bigger a difference between the compounds as it was on the Audi. But the lap times do not lie on this one. It's about 2.5 second difference from the softs to the wets, and that is across kind of both of them. Again, remarkably consistent. The only thing I'd say from this, what we saw from the hard, the medium, and the soft is kind of what I would be expecting. The wet tyres are perhaps a little bit too good on the tarmac, although that is, I am mostly thinking about Formula 1, you know, what sort of intermediate-ish tyres, how they would work on GT cars, I can't say I know particularly well. And things like Formula E do have some all-weather tyres that will work on both, so yeah, I'm not quite sure how the compounds stack up. I would say perhaps the wets maybe feel a little bit too fast for what they are, but they are still slower than the hard compound tyres, which is interesting, and it is what you would be expecting. So, having completed that test, of course, that is only one circuit. That is Lime Rock, which is, I guess, a little bit of an odd circuit, but you know, it's a short lap. It's the kind of track that I like. Maybe not normally the circuit you'd see a GT3 car go race around. So I set off to go and run a little bit further a test on. I stuck with the Audi on here. Went off to the Nürburgring GP circuit. We're talking a much longer lap around here, much longer lap around this circuit. So I took the R8. Now for this, I only ran the hard tyres and the soft tyres. I picked the track itself because it's, again, one of the tracks I can be a bit more consistent around. I know relatively well. On the hard tyres, the car ran a 204.4. Stick the vehicle on the soft tyres, it ran a 201.4. So we're talking 3 seconds a lap difference around here. Now, this actual gap between the tyres is likely to vary depending on circuits. Tracks with a lot of straights and perhaps less corners, it's going to be less significant, slightly less significant, if more of your lap time is taken up with acceleration, so with straight line speed perhaps. This is always going to vary, but I'm seeing the results from all of this that I was expecting. Essentially, which is what I was hoping for from the tyre model, all of that looking very, very positive. Of course, you might be sitting there wondering, well, why on earth would you be running anything other than the soft tyres? They are clearly the fastest way to go, and that is very, very true. But of course, that doesn't tell a whole story. The reason you have these different tyre compounds is all to do with longevity of the tyres. So, for example, I'm sliding the R8 around again. I did quite a lot of that with this car. It's quite oversteering, naturally. All the vehicles are on the same fuel levels as well for this, so there's no weight differences and same setup, etc. But the reason why the tyre compounds are significant, the soft tyres will heat up quicker and will generally be your fastest compound, but they do not last as long as the mediums or the hards. So, I went off to do a slightly different test. For this, I would grab the NSX. Actually, I preferred the way this car drove, much more suited my driving style, the NSX, and came to the Silverstone International Circuit. Again, I'm using a track that may be a little bit short for a GT3 car, but I'm using a track that I myself am relatively competent around so that I could be consistent. The first test I did was to run just a 10-lap race around the International Circuit with the vehicle on soft compound tyres to see what the tyre wear would be like. After that 10-lap race, which lasted about 11 minutes, the tyres got to 20% tyre wear. My lap times were pretty much the same the whole way through. So we're running about mid to highish 104s around this track, and it didn't change over the course of that 10-lap race. I think my fastest lap was actually the final lap as well. And so yeah, 20% tyre wear, absolutely no difference in lap time. Of course, the theory is as the tyres get more and more worn, the lap time is going to drop off. 10 laps is never going to be enough to affect it. And that's perhaps what you would expect from a GT car like this. So I then went and did a 50-lap run around here. Now, I can't be using Rivals mode for this because Rivals takes off tyre wear and so on. So I was actually using this as a sort of free play race, but all the AI is taken off just so I didn't have any other factors confusing the data, if you like. I was being scientific here and proper and all that. So I set off to a 50-lap run around this circuit, and I've got my notes of how things went. So the tyre wear, we know what the tyre wear was going to be for the first 10 laps. It got to about 20% tyre wear. There was no change in the lap speed. And again, that is what I saw when I went to do the next race. By lap 20, we're up to 40% tyre wear. It's fairly consistent through this, still running identical lap times. By lap 25, I was up to 50% tyre wear and was still doing completely the same lap times. So to the halfway point in this race, I was doing pretty much identical. I have to say I was impressed with my own level of consistency here, in that I was running basically between a 104.3 and about a 104.8 for almost the entire time. So yeah, lots and lots of consistency within that run. That was great. Up until lap 25. Lap 25 actually was my fastest lap. After that, I made a little mistake on lap 26, so I lost a little bit of time on that. But after lap 26, I could not get close to... I say I could not get close to the 104s, but then I started to lose chunks of time that no matter what I did, I couldn't make up. By lap 30, we were up to 60% tyre wear. So, I mean, that's a good amount of the tyre worn, but still got a good amount of life left on it. We got... So, by lap 30, it was that 60% tyre wear. I was about a second a lap slow, and that was consistent. I couldn't push faster than that. By lap 35, we got up to 70% tyre wear. I was now 3 seconds a lap slower. Nothing I could do as a driver was really making a big difference at this. I just physically couldn't carry the speed through the corners anymore. And it was the front left. It's this track, a lot of the load is going through that front left tyre. That's the one that was hurting the most on here. Not so much the rear tyres. I've got no assist on, no traction zones were really giving it issues. All about the front left tyre. By lap 39, we were now down to 5 seconds a lap slower. The car on 78% tyre wear. It was becoming really, really difficult to drive. I could still drive it. It wasn't completely useless, but we were losing huge chunks of time. By lap 43, we were running 7 seconds a lap slower, and I was losing about half a second a lap. The longer I kept running the car, the worse it got. By lap 46, it basically stabilised for a while. Once we got to about 80% tyre wear, we were losing about 7 seconds a lap, and it kind of stabilised around there. It was horrible to drive at this stage. We got to 100% tyre wear by lap 48, and then it was sort of 9-10 seconds a lap slower. Actually hit a curb and broke a lot of the aero for the final lap, so I don't know quite exactly what the final lap times would have been in comparison. But the tyres degraded as you would want. It was actually it was interesting to do, and the results were what I was hoping for here. This is what you would expect from the vehicle. You know, for a while the tyres were absolutely fine, and they did gradually get worse. There wasn't like a point where it ran to sort of 75% and then become useless. It gradually got worse and worse and worse over the course of the laps, which is what you would be expecting the tyre to be doing on this one. So yes, for a 50-lap race here, you would have to pit once with the soft tyres. There is a little bit of a caveat to this, though, in that while, you know, the soft tyres for this race, perhaps you could go and run the vehicle on medium tyres and you wouldn't be losing that speed, as this is for about an hour-long event. The fuel tank on this NSX, now this will vary from car to car, the fuel tank on this NSX could only run for 50 laps. That was the maximum. I put the full 100% fuel load in it, and it could only run to that 50 laps. So I don't know why you'd ever bother with the hard compound tyre, because it's so much slower over the course of the lap, and most of the race cars, certainly a lot of the vehicles that I have seen, wouldn't have a fuel tank big enough to run to ever really get the most out of them. The choice between going for a soft tyre that's quicker and a medium tyre that will last the entire race, that would be an interesting one here. Because the medium tyre, you'll make it, but you'll be using a good chunk of seconds per lap. To the soft tyres that have to pit, and all of that strategy, very, very interesting, but a lot of cars don't have a big enough fuel tank for the hard tyres to really be all that effective. Maybe some of the LMP cars might do, never really got into that one. Yeah, this is also, it's all very interesting to me. This is what I was wanting to see from the game. The tyre compounds genuinely make a difference, are genuinely significant, can throw up some really interesting strategy calls, and degrade in a way that is natural, in a way that you kind of want to see it. And I'm sure, I'm not very good at tyre saving, but I'm sure if you know what you're doing, you could potentially drive the car differently, save some tyre life and that kind of stuff. So yeah, tyre compounds, really, really interesting thing. Really interesting thing. Not going to play much of a part in shorter races. Everything's going to be on soft tyres, but longer events, that is definitely a very significant part. But there we go. That is going to be it for this video. I hope this has been interesting for you, as it was for me, sort of testing this out and finding this all out. Thank you all very much for watching. Until next time, goodbye.